Steve Parvin. My period of service started in medical school in 1965, and my period of service in the Navy went from then until about 1975, when I resigned my commission and came back to Starkville to help take care of my father. My second period of service was in the Army Reserve and entailed going to Desert Storm, serving as a surgeon in a combat support hospital out of Tennessee. So I have Navy service and Army service, about 14 years active duty altogether, and most of that time was in the Navy. Only when they needed me I was a Navy flight surgeon initially, and I would go and relieve the flight surgeon on carriers when they had to go do something or take leave. That you can't have operations without a flight surgeon on board, and so most of my time was spent on the Lexington out of Pensacola, Florida, because that's where I was. And but most of my time was spent with the Anti-Submarine Warfare Squadron, which was at that time P3s, based out of Hawaii. And from there we had deployments to Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam.
Someone you know.
Yeah, we had, I forgot what I was going to say, but that was my tour as a flight surgeon. Then I went to San Diego to the Naval Hospital and did surgical training 5 years, and became a general surgeon, and then moved back to Pensacola because I needed to be closer to my father. And then I subsequently resigned my commission, really. I was in the Army, I was sure in the sand. I don't know about the sandbox, but we spent, I was with 377 Combat Support Hospital out of Tennessee. We had about 400 personnel in the hospital and probably 30 doctors. Rest of them were nurses and support people. And it took 52 lowboy trucks to move our hospital.
Wow.
But we had everything you needed. It was an amazing hospital and an amazing experience. Right, well, I was in the Army Reserves that time because there was no place in the Navy to drill around here, and the medical corps is different than you line people. And, it was a good job, good training, and good experience all around. When Desert Storm came up, they didn't have enough medical surgeons in the Army, and that's how our hospital, all the surgeons had previous military duty, and that's what they needed. They didn't need these new recruits to come in and send them overseas. And so all of us had prior military experience, and so we didn't really have to have any training to speak of. In the hospital, a normal day, it depends on where you were. When the Gulf War started, we were on the border of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and everybody took off, and it was the worst night you can imagine. It was cold and windy, and everybody was worried about chemical warfare, and that's why he picked it. General Schwarzkopf picked that night. But it wasn't long before all the regular soldiers left us behind. The only reason they stopped was they ran out of bullets and gas. And we went into Iraq with our hospital, and we were about 120 miles from Baghdad, and we set up the hospital, only part of it, a small part of it. Thank goodness we didn't have a whole lot to do. But every day of interest, all these Iraqis would come in and surrender to us because we were there. And so we had to we had to make some of our people guards and give them guns, and most people didn't have guns. And then every night the military police would come by in a big bus, pick them up, and take them to, I don't know where they took them, but it was a big clearing center because these people were sick. They were miserable. And some of them were even American citizens. And their only comment was, "What took you so long?" Because they were in pitiful shape. They had hepatitis, TB, dysentery, anything you could have, they had. And they were all malnourished. So they were actually glad to see us. That was after 5 days, the Desert Storm War ended. So then our hospital was sent to Kuwait to set up a hospital there, and we did, and we took care of all the military people in that area and a lot of civilians because they had poor medical care, mainly because they had very poor supplies. They just didn't have anything. So we took care of them, but there again, we did not have the surgery to do that was done, like for instance in Vietnam. It was mainly complications of people stepping on bombs, landmines. And so we stayed there for five or 6 months and then came home. I was fortunate enough to have some of the doctors here, the women's clinic, for instance, took my employees and employed them all the time I was gone and gave them back to me when I got back, which was really nice.
Yeah,
that was very nice. You don't hear that, but that was Dr. Pearson and Dr. Locke and Tommy Cobb, and they took our employees because we just had to shut down.
Yeah.
I think in the Desert Storm we did. There were so many things going on that you just had to have an anchor somewhere. And we were very fortunate to have good chaplains, and they conducted services, and they made a big difference. And I think that was where faith played a big part in what I was doing. But it was a big deal, and when we came back from Vietnam, everybody just kind of snuck into the country because everybody was mad and critical and spitting on people and cussing people. And when we came back from Desert Storm, there were parades and people we didn't even know met us at the airport, and at 1 a.m. they'd have a big party, and it was amazing to see the support for the military during that war as opposed to the Vietnam War.
I think that's doctors.
Right, they were looking for people with prior training who could handle themselves, and they didn't have to train them, basically. So we had a good group of doctors. Everybody was well trained, and we could have taken care of anything that I know of, but thank goodness we didn't have a whole lot to do.
Everybody that were going to deploy.
Where were you in the Philippines? Clark?
Clark?
We went to Clark a lot. We were at Sangley Point. And they gave, Sangley Point was turned back over to the Filipinos and basically ruined. But we would go to Clark anytime we had a bad emergency that, I was not a trained surgeon at that time. I was a doctor, but not a trained surgeon. And, we had and I delivered babies at Sangley, but if you had a problem, you medevaced them in a hurry to Clark. That was our backup.
Big hospital.
Big hospital with a lot of specialties, yeah. Made a difference. Because we were just sitting out. We had no blood, and we had one Filipino nurse, and that was it. And the doctor, and that was it. So that was pretty different. But we managed.